Many doubted we'd ever see it, but here it is. The return to glory.
McDavid stops up. What a move. Shoots. Scores!
Hey, everybody, and welcome to The Outsiders. It's Bryn Griffiths along with Robin Brownlee on podcast number 9?
9 it is, sir.
Whew. Okay, well, let's get right to it today. Let's talk about the Edmonton Oilers right off the top. The winning streak is over. 5-0 to start the season. It's been a long time since that happened. Goes back to, the 84-85 season? There was some pretty good talent on that team.
You think?
Yeah. But anyway, the streak is over. Lost to the Chicago Blackhawks on Monday night. And Chicago played very well in that game. I thought Corey Crawford was outstanding. Oilers goaltending, with the exception of that LA game where it was a little bit of an adventure for Mike Smith early, the goaltending hasn't really been a problem so far for this hockey club. But what was your assessment of the game against Chicago?
Well, I tell you what, Bryn, the goaltending to me is a little bit of a revelation. Frankly, it's been an Achilles heel for them for too long. And what they're getting now is, and it's a cliche, but they're getting goaltending that gives them a chance to win. They weren't good enough to win last night, but the goaltending was good enough in my mind. And that's something that just wasn't there last season. I'm really surprised by Mike Smith, how solid he's been. Koskinen has been pretty good. Now, Smith had the adventure with the puck. Had he stayed in the blue paint a couple of games ago and just stopped pucks, the Oilers would have been fine. But you know what? They're getting goaltending. Oh, and James Neal. He has now more goals through 6 games this season than he had all of last season. How do you like that?
He played, I think, 63 games last season with the Calgary Flames, and here we are through 6 games. He's already got that total, so that trade. And, people are going to be doing this all season long where they do the comparables. And at the end of the day, I think Calgary got what they thought that they needed. And I don't know if that's going to work out for them, but that's what they're, the only people that have to be happy about it are the Calgary Flames and maybe the fans. The Edmonton Oilers needed just one more guy who could score some goals and assist with the power play, which has been very solid for me through the first 6 games. In fact, going into the Chicago game on Monday night, they were the number 2 power play in the league. If the power play can contribute and keep contributing over the next few months, they'll find themselves in a positive situation, because everybody looks at that American Thanksgiving date, and if you are kind of in, you're in. And generally, with the exception of the St. Louis Blues last year, that tends to hold true. So I always remember Peter Marr, the longtime voice of the Calgary Flames on the radio, telling me that he believed, and I certainly believe this now, that what you do in October and November really does set the tone for the rest of the season, because wins should be a little easier to come by. If your power play is clicking, that really helps. But I firmly believe if the Edmonton Oilers can just find a way to cruise from now till the end of November and put themselves in a good position, they'll be in a good position all season.
Well, I tell you what, Bryn, you can't play your way into the playoffs in October, but you can play your way out of them if you get a terrible start. So far, so good on that front.
And the other thing about this squad, and we've talked about the net minding and the power play, the other thing that I've kind of liked, and I thought they were a little brain dead in the game against Chicago. They just seemed like they were mentally a little out of it. And if you're just one step slow, you don't win those loose puck battles. If you're one step slow, you don't get your coverage the way you want in your own defensive zone. Mm-hmm. I thought they were one step slow against a team that really was desperate to find a way to win their first game of the season. And you and I have covered hockey teams long enough to know that these guys, these athletes, are in such spectacular condition that they don't physically wear down as much as fans think. They mentally break down. We've been on long road trips where we've seen them play, 6 or 7 games in 14 to 16 nights, and by the time you get to those last 2 or 3 games on the road, they're mentally tired. And when you're tired, you just make mistakes.
Yeah, not every game. You're not going to have your best stuff every game. What you want to do is minimize it. So far, the Oilers have done that They're 5-1, and I don't think anybody saw that coming. So they're good right now.
At the time of our taping, the only unbeaten team left is the Colorado Avalanche, who, and I've watched a lot of their games lately, if they can find a way to get solid goaltending throughout the entire season, they are going to be one tough team. They can beat you up. They're physical. They're big. But you know what? They're also fast. They've got some great talent. Nathan McKinnon. Oh, my God, he can fly. That whole team can fly, so watch out for the Colorado Avalanche. I guess I'm Captain Obvious here by saying that, but every time I watch them, I'm very impressed, and they're highly entertaining to watch. All right, talking about the Edmonton Eskimos, Robin, because we've got a big show planned today. Edmonton Eskimos found a way to win that game against the British Columbia Lions over the weekend, so they're into the playoffs. Now they've got a few games left. Can they find a way to tune up and tune in so they might be able to do some damage or make a few teams sweat?
Honestly, Bryn, I don't think so. I think we're probably going to see Trevor Harris when we get to the playoffs. We're certainly likely to see him in that first game against Saskatchewan. They've got the bye week. He's got time to rest. My understanding from being out at practice was that, he's throwing the ball again. The bye is really helpful for him. The takeaway for me, Bryn, in that game was, well, two things. I don't think the Eskimos are there yet, and maybe Harris bumps them over the top and makes them competitive, not only against Saskatchewan but in the playoffs because they're now in. But was watching Mike Riley of the Lions go down with that broken wrist. We've talked all season about how he was the last man standing, which seemed a bit odd seeing as he takes more licks than any quarterback I can think of, but he always gets back up. Well, this time he didn't get back up, and when he did, you could tell something was badly off. Broken wrist. Mike Riley's season is over, and you hate to see that at any time. The fact that he's a former MOP and Edmonton Eskimo doesn't make it any better. You want to beat a team at their best, and the Lions were done when he went out and are done now in terms of the playoffs. It's too bad his season has to end that way.
Coming up on our podcast today, we're going to be chatting with former Edmonton Oilers head coach Ron Lowe, also played as a netminder with the Oilers and a few other teams, and also going to be chatting with another netminder, Corey Hirsch, who is now one of the broadcasting voices on radio for the Vancouver Canucks, and his story, it's a wowzer. I think you're going to get blown away by this interview with Corey coming up in a few minutes.
Well, I tell you, I'm looking forward to talking to Corey. We crossed paths in Kamloops back in the mid-1980s. He was a scrawny, red-headed goaltender. I think he weighed about $150 back then. I left Kamloops and came to the Edmonton Journal. He played there. He went on to an NHL career with the Rangers. He played in the league. But the story about Corey were the mental health issues. He not only endured but survived. And the story he told a couple of years back on the Players Tribune, if you haven't read it, I'd suggest you read it. It's called Dark. There's a follow-up to that called You Are Not Alone. Corey Hirsch, some 30 years later, is 47 years old and one of the great advocates for mental health in this country. We've got to get out there and talk about this. That's what he does now, as well as being an announcer for Vancouver Canucks games. Corey Hirsch has turned mental illness that almost took his life into a calling where he is going out and talking to people and advocating on their behalf. It's a wonderful story, and it's worth listening to. And Ronnie Lowe, the Edmonton Oilers family, the Boston Bruins, and the NHL at large lost Teddy Green last Tuesday.
Yep.
He was a wonderful man. He was a fiercely competitive hockey player. He was a 7-time Stanley Cup winner, 5 of those here with the Oilers as a coach. Ted Green was the epitome of the you can't judge a book by its cover. Tough as nails and mean as hell on the outside, to those who didn't know him, and wonderful, generous, kind man on the inside to those who did. And I certainly look forward to talking to Ron Lowe, who was as close to Teddy as anybody.
Yeah, we'll have some stories. I got to tell you a quick one, though, that came to mind when I heard about his passing on Saturday afternoon, and that is, if he liked you, he always battled and came to your rescue. And the best example I can think of was in Boston, where he is still beloved, by the way. We used to joke about the fact that the team bus would have to wait, not because of somebody on the current team, but there were legions of Bruins fans that were outside the hotel that wanted to get Ted Green's autograph. They still held him in very, very high regard. And the best example for me was one night we went out for dinner to Legal Seafoods like everybody because we wanted some chowder. And then we went to a sports bar afterwards, and I went to get a couple of beer for a couple of the guys at the table, and I was talking with the bartender, just chatting, and he found out where I was from and this kind of stuff, and some of the coaches were there. Anyway, I turned around really quickly, and there was a big guy, by the way, standing right behind me. I didn't realize how close he was, and when I turned around, I spilled the beer all over the front of his shirt.
Oops.
And he wasn't very happy, nor should he have been. It was a dumb maneuver on my part. I would call it a rookie mistake. Anyway, this guy grabbed me by the shirt, like just right here, grabbed me by the shirt, and I thought he was just going to tune me in right there. Just try to do the lawnmower. And out of nowhere, who do you think showed up?
I'm guessing Ted Green?
Yes, Ted Green. And he came over and says, "Is there a problem here?" And the bartender recognized him immediately and said, "No, there isn't, Mr. Green, sir. Everything's just going to be fine." And then he looked at the big guy who was about to clock me and said, "Steve, everything is okay, right?" And Steve looked and he said, "Mr. Green this is one of Mr. Green's friends." Oh, and then everything went away. And I apologized. I bought the guy a beer because he was standing right behind me, and I bought 2 more beer. But I always remember how fast he moved from the table to come over to my rescue because he was a team guy. He was just a team guy.
Well, it might not have gone very well for that man. He probably took the best route out of that situation.
Well, the second trip back to the bar, the bartender was talking about how this is a guy, these are career bartenders in Boston. It's just like Cheers. And he remembered Ted Green vividly, and the moment Ted just appeared into the scenario, he just basically wanted to make sure he diffused what could have been an ugly situation. And anyway, like I said, it just made me laugh because there's so many great Ted Green stories. We all have them. We all want to share them, and we'll be doing that with Ron Lowe coming up in a couple of minutes. But coming up next, are you ready? Corey Hirsch is going to join us. Looking forward to it. Corey Hirsch. Lots of stuff to talk about. Well, he played for 4 different NHL teams, the Rangers, the Canucks, the Capitals, and the Stars. He is certainly an advocate nationwide for mental health issues, and he joins us on our podcast today. Corey Hirsch, hello.
What's going on, gentlemen? Beautiful day today.
Yeah.
Hockey season is upon us. That's always good.
Oh, yeah. How are you doing, Corey?
I'm doing great. I'm on the Colour Commentator for the Vancouver Canucks and radio. So it's going to be an exciting year. Like, the Canucks have a pretty good team with Pettersson and a lot of young guys, Hughes. And it's pretty exciting to watch these guys grow. They're young, but Canucks, I think eventually they're going to be a pretty good team.
This is the 3rd season for you doing color?
This is my 3rd season, yeah. And what better job is there than to talk about hockey? Well, other than playing hockey, that's for sure.
Well, we chatted a few weeks ago with Ray Ferraro, who said the learning curve was quite steep. He said because when you play, you just kind of go and do, but now all of a sudden you got to find ways to describe and explain the game to fans. You got to be fair. There's all sorts of different things you got to take into consideration. But he does a national broadcast where you're just doing a local radio broadcast.
Yeah, it's you know what, the fans here in Vancouver are very passionate about their team. There's no question about that. So it's changed a lot since I was a player. Like, social media changed the landscape quite a bit. I think fans are more knowledgeable now, and I think they're a little bit more demanding. So it's been fun, but I mean, you make a mistake on air and people know, like, they'll call you out for it.
Oh yeah. Hey, Corey, I could talk hockey with you all day, but I want to talk about something that's a big part of your life and something that moving forward is very important to you. I got to tell you, Corey, you were a kid in your first year in Kamloops, in my last year in Kamloops, before I came to the Edmonton Journal. I followed your career. What I didn't understand is some of the issues you were dealing with in the rink and outside the rink. And then a couple years back in 2017, I read an article by you in the Players Tribune, multiple dark, but I call the article dark. And the first sentence, I got to be honest, Corey, it grabbed me by the neck and it wouldn't let go, and it made me read it, and it made me think a lot, and it's really your story. And that first sentence of that item was, "It's the summer of 1994. I'm standing at the edge of a cliff in Kamloops, British Columbia, and I am checking out."
Wow.
That is a kick in the gut, whether you know Corey Hirsch or not. Talk about what you meant by that, and talk about how you got there, and then we're going to go over how far you've come since then. But how did you get standing on that cliff, Corey?
Well, it's, now it's quite a long time ago. It seems like just a distant memory, but I have obsessive compulsive disorder. So what that is I have what's called Puro. So just to start and explain it a little bit is that, everyone thinks the hand washers and the people that don't want to touch dirty things, that's what they really associate OCD with. And people are like, well, what's wrong with that? Well, everything I do is done in my head. So you would never be able to see it outwardly. So, and there's three different types of thoughts of Puro. One is there's harm thoughts, there's sexual intrusive thoughts, and there's scrupulosity thoughts. And what happens is that people that almost, such as myself, that almost care too much about things, we overanalyze, and that's where OCD comes in. So I'll give you just a quick example of it. If you're ever driving your car down the road and you're driving, there's traffic coming towards you, and you have that impulsive thought, well, what if I just swerve my car into the other lane? Mm-hmm. Right? And then I think everybody's pretty much had a thought like that. So someone that doesn't have an OCD type brain, what they do is they just go, well, that was a silly thought, and they just move on with their day and nothing else happens. Someone like me who has an OCD brain thinks about, oh my God, is that something that I'd really be doing? And then I'd go home and I'd analyze it to death, and it would cycle in my head, and it wouldn't leave me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now that thought is just the one small facet of Puro. Thoughts that I had, that's a pleasant one compared to things that I have. So that's just the best way to describe it in a simple way. So, when I was with the New York Rangers, I just finished playing in the Olympic silver medal and got with the New York Rangers on the run to the Stanley Cup. I was the third goalie, and I was out with a couple of other Black Aces from Washington. And all of a sudden I got one of those thoughts. And like I said, most people would just go home and they'd be like, oh, that was a silly thought. Me, I thought it would just go away on its own. So I went home and I went to bed. And the next morning I couldn't stop thinking about it. I just couldn't. It just kept cycling over and over in my head, trying to figure it out. And it was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I didn't know what it was. I had no idea. So OCD is a little different. Depression and some of the other mental illnesses can kind of creep up on you. OCD, I can tell you where I was, the time, the place, what happens. And most people with OCD can describe that as well, where something in your brain just kind of breaks, and it's like a broken record. It's like you can't put the needle back on the broken record and you can't fix it. So anyways, I got to the point where, the Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers come, but I'm having these debilitating panic attacks, and I can barely get out of bed to the point where my mom had to come out to New York to try and help me. So, I mean, this is the Coles Notes version I'm giving you guys.
Oh, yeah.
But that summer I go to get diagnosed, and I end up getting misdiagnosed. And the therapist that tries to help me, and I just knew something was wrong. I didn't know what it was. Actually tries to help me, think that I am these terrible things I'm thinking, and that maybe, it's something I need to deal with. Well, that was completely the wrong thing. And it's something people get misdiagnosed with OCD all the time. And it actually can be quite deadly. So to me, having these thoughts of harm, these sexual intrusive thoughts, these awful thoughts that wouldn't stop, I would have rather been just not here anymore. And so that's how I ended up in that position. But, coming to to that day, and I guess there was a sliver of hope that I was something that I didn't really want to end my life, but I just didn't want to have to like had no other way to find the way to make it stop. And I guess there's a sliver of hope somewhere that, I ended up being able to, just in somehow that I wouldn't end up being that way for the rest of my life. And I just decided, okay, I'm going to live with it like this. So that's kind of how I ended up there that day. And I spent the next 3 years in hiding, panic attacks, but on the ice, I'm playing amazing because it's kind of my safe haven.
Right.
So I'll let you guys take it from here. I give you the Coles Notes, but
well, I want to go back just a little bit further because let's go back to the Kamloops time. And now I'm thinking to myself, did you really start to know that this was a problem even before you started playing junior hockey? How far back does this even go? You obviously talked about when you were in New York and Washington and how that was a pivotal time for you. But I want to go back just a little further. Did you know anything was a little not right or a little
not
off?
A clue.
No idea.
Not
huh?
a clue. No, I had anxiety issues.
Yeah.
But who doesn't? Right. I mean, I was playing junior hockey. I mean, I had anxiety issues, but nothing as definitive as what this was. Like I said, I can tell you the day, the moment, everything. And it's that's where OCD is misunderstood. And OCD, I never knew this, but people with OCD are 10 times more likely to take their own lives than the average person. And I never really saw OCD that way. And I don't think a lot of people did until the article came out. Like, it was kind of like the people kind of thought it was funny in a way. And it becomes like a, I'm so OCD. I clean my house, so much. And it's like, well, if you knew the people that I know that almost ended up dead because of OCD, you probably wouldn't be saying that. So, but it became kind of I guess it doesn't get the respect that a lot of other mental illnesses get. And that's interesting. That's a weird way to say it, but it's true.
Well, you hear people use that term flippantly, and I know what they mean, but really I do too. It's got nothing to do with the real issues that you faced, Corey. I can only wonder, the era you grew up in, who could you talk to? I mean,
nobody.
You're locked. Yeah, you're locked in. You're locked in this alone, aren't you? Really?
Oh, completely. And it was, and it's it's the terrible, repetitive thoughts that keep you trapped. You're like a prisoner in your own mind. And every day you're hoping that you find the key that'll just make it go away, like the one thing that'll make it go away. And you never do until you go get therapy and go get help. So, there really was nobody. I talked to my mom. I talked to a few close people, but then you just go into hiding. And most people with mental illness, it's 8 to 10 years before they get help with their issues. And by then you're so intertwined in it that it's hard to do the therapy. So, I preach early diagnosis whenever when I talk, because it's like cancer at stage 4. I mean, how hard is it? It's so much harder to cure than it is at stage 1.
Yeah.
And mental illness is kind of the same way. Like, it's so much easier at stage 1 than it is at stage 4. But the stigma has forced people into hiding, so they don't go get therapy and they don't get help.
Well, and Corey, here's the thing, and this is not meant as a slight to the people involved in the game. But there is a culture in hockey. If you talk about difficulty as a member of the general public, raising this issue, saying, look, I've got a problem here, I need some help. My read on it, and you lived it, is it's even harder to do in the culture of hockey where these are macho guys, these are tough guys, they play through broken bones and broken teeth, and you don't complain and you don't bitch and moan, and you just get on with it. That's got to be the loneliest place of all.
It really is. And the fact that, and Robin, I mean, you've seen it, you've been through all of it too, as well as that you've seen what junior hockey is like. So junior hockey for me in Kamloops was amazing. It was a safe place to play. Bob Brown, Ken Hitchcock, like I am forever grateful for that. But the atmosphere that is created around hockey, whether it's college or junior or midget or whatever, it's not just the CHL or any. It's that suck it up mentality. It's that toughness mentality. So I grew up learning how to be a man on a bus with 20 other guys between the ages of 16 and 19. Okay, so where do we start? Right?
Yeah.
Like, that's where I learned about masculinity. Okay, well, so how wrong was that in the first place? But as far as, that's the culture that we create. And it's okay to be tough and to you can still, but when it comes to mental health, you wouldn't walk around. A guy wouldn't take a slap shot with a broken and break his leg and then try and play the next 20 games. He'd go and he'd be out for 6 weeks, right? So when your brain kind of breaks, we have this kind of don't see, don't hear, don't tell type mentality. Well, you have to get it fixed. It's no different. Yeah, you can walk around and try and play on a broken leg, but you're not going to play very well. Or a separated shoulder. Well, if something's going on in your brain and you're severely depressed or you've got anxiety issues, it's hard to play. So we have to treat people and tell people that it's okay to have that.
Yeah.
And you know what? Go get it fixed. You'll be a better player.
Hey, Corey, I'm going to go back to Robin and I had a conversation with Theo Fleury probably a couple months ago, and it's a little different, but in some ways it isn't. He talked about how he had a moment where he was at a book signing and he noticed one guy in the line who just seemed very withdrawn and was holding the book to his chest, and came up to him eventually and put the book in front of him, and he looked at him, and the guy turns to Theo and says, "Me too." And at that point, Theron said he recognized that everything he'd gone through, he'd had to find a way to try to help others. Did you have a click moment where all of a sudden you realized, okay, everything? Where was that moment?
So I was at I always knew that I would try and help people in some form or way. I didn't really know how. But what really kickstarted it was I was at a Coyotes hockey game in Arizona. And Jared Bouquet is a friend of mine. I played junior with him. He's an agent. And he's sitting at the game with a player that I think is supposed to be playing in the NHL at the time. I'm like, I know everyone around the league. And I asked him, I said, why aren't you playing? And he's like, well, I'm in rehab. And I'm thinking, okay, well, what do you mean? Your knees or whatever, your rehab, whatever. He's like, no, I'm in rehab for alcohol and drug addiction. And I'm like, okay, well, all right, whatever. So I'm like, I know there's obviously with addiction, there's obviously mental health issues. They go hand in hand. So I'm like, let's go for coffee. He's probably lonely. He's here by himself. It's like November, season starting. So I take him for coffee, and I won't say the name of the person.
Okay.
And I just look at him and I just start spilling my story because, I know that there's mental health and addiction go hand in hand. And he looks at me and he said the same thing. He's like, oh my God, that's the same stuff that I go through, almost with the OCD. And his mom had to resuscitate him twice from fentanyl overdoses.
Yeah. Wow.
So it was at that moment I was like, okay, you know what? I'm not the only one out there. And people are, at that point, I didn't really see OCD as suicidal for people. And I just thought, for me, that's what it was. And I didn't really realize that. And it was that moment when I kind of just realized like, holy crap, like I have to get my story out there. People need to hear my story because I can't let this happen. Right. And so I ended up going to, it was bizarre. And then the chain of events just kind of happened. Like I ended up going, Ron Smith, my coach from the minors, he ends up passing away. And I end up going to his funeral in Toronto, and I meet Lana Quinn, who ends up, she's the head of the Sedin's Foundation, and or helps with doing that stuff. And she ends up connecting with the Players Tribune, and it's like it was just the snowball effect came. And then when the article came out today, it's still the most. I mean, think of all the great athletes that have been in Players Tribune, like Derek Jeter owns it, and all those guys that have had stories. Today, my story is still the most clicked on they've ever had. And it had like something like 2 million hits in one day, or something ridiculous. So then that just told me, you know what, this is a bigger problem than I even knew it was. So it was quite incredible how well, and I was terrified before it came out. I was like, well, here it goes. I'm going to be, this is it for me. I'll never work in the NHL again. And it's been completely the opposite. People have been amazing.
Okay, so I guess the obvious question is, now what? What can we do?
Well, to me, it's just continuing doing things like this, like talking about it, telling the story. Somebody out there is going to listen to this podcast that has no idea what's going on in their brain, and they're struggling, and they're going to go, "Holy crap, that's exactly what's happening to me," and then they're going to go get help. And you might get, I don't know how many listeners you have, but it's all about sharing stories, being open about stories, talking about it. And, my thing is that why in high school and middle school, why wasn't I taught this stuff? Like, why was this information withheld from me? It almost killed me, on mental health because of the stigma. We're not teaching our children, about mental health. And the fact is 20%, 1 in 5 are going to get a mental illness. So it doesn't discriminate. That could be your child. That could be my child. That could be a doctor, a lawyer, a hockey player, a construction worker. So why are we withholding this information from people? Diagnoses and the ability to go get help. So what can we do? Keep talking about it. Keep, letting people know, getting the word out, letting people know that it's okay to not be okay. That's what we can do.
And Corey, what you're saying is so important. Being able to talk about it, having a place to go, a shoulder to lean on, an ear to listen. And it's not just the National Hockey League, it's society as a whole, but the NHL, the game you grew up loving, it's a reflection of our society. I think we've got to do more on all fronts. Talking is the start, but providing action and services after somebody says, I've got a problem. Whether it's the NHL or society at large, we have to get there, don't we?
No question we do. And, people are talking now. Now the issue is that we're so far behind because we kept it hidden for so long that we don't have the resources now. We don't have the doctors. We don't have the therapists. So that's where we're at right now. So people are like, okay, well, yes, I've got an issue. What do I do? Where do I go? Well, the first thing to me you do is you go see your GP and you let them know what's going on and you get a referral to a therapist. But it's so important to get a proper diagnosis. So, for example, the first lady that I went to see, and I don't blame her, it's just I had no idea what I was looking for, wasn't able to treat me, misdiagnosed me, and it almost killed me. So, when you go to a therapist, they're not all alike. You don't go to a shoulder surgeon for knee surgery. So if you have depression, you should go see someone that specializes. If you're bipolar, you should go see someone that specializes in being, or OCD, you should go. Do you get what I'm saying? Not all therapists, just because it's a therapist doesn't mean that they're qualified to treat obsessive compulsive disorder. There's lots that are not. So you really need to go to your GP, get a referral, and then make sure whatever you get diagnosed with, that you're going to see a specialist. But our wait times are way too long right now. So that's another issue, but that's just what it is.
Yeah.
Corey, I don't know how to phrase this, even though I make a living asking questions, so I'll just say it.
Yeah, absolutely. Please, nothing's off topic.
Like I say, I remember that redheaded 16-year-old kid in the loops. And people can, whether they know somebody well or just through work, they don't know what's happening in another person's life. I guess I want to ask you, are you okay now? Is this something you get okay over, or is this like an addiction? It's one day at a time, because the thought that you talked about at the beginning of that article about checking out, man, I got to say, I just want to know you're not thinking that way anymore.
Yeah. No, you know what? That's a great question. No, you know what? I still deal with stuff. Like, there's no cure for mental illness. There really isn't. But you can live a very productive life. Medications are out there, and there's lots of tools and therapy. And I've done enough therapy and that, and thank you for asking. I really appreciate that. People are always so afraid to ask people, are you thinking of harming yourself? And I'm like, you know what? Those are the questions we need to ask people if they're struggling. As for me, I do very well. That's the other message that I want to get out is that I want people to look at me when they look at mental illness. I want them to look at Robin Lehner. I want them to look at Michael Phelps. Michael Phelps, 23 gold medals, battles depression. But can he not? He can be very successful. One of the things when you're going through this is you feel like you're doomed to a life of zero success and mental illness. And it's not true. So I look at it like, look, I've played in the NHL. I've coached in the NHL. I'm a broadcaster for the Vancouver Canucks. Yeah, I still have tough days, but I know that tomorrow is always going to be a better day. And I do my therapy. And if I need to, I get back to my medication. And that's another thing. There's a stigma with medication. Medication saved my life. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you guys if I hadn't taken medication at the time. And people are so afraid and they're like, oh, this and that. And you know what? If you need medication and you need it to help you fight mental illness, you take it. And, we'll take other things. We'll take Oxycontins and Vicodins for painkillers, and we'll give people those. And those are the most deadly things you can give people. But people are so afraid of antidepressants because, it might make them look different because they're or crazy because they're on a drug for their brain. No, your brain breaks just like your body does. And sometimes it needs a little bit of help to get you going in the right direction.
Corey, your Twitter account is at Corey Hirsch. Your last post, it says, on this Suicide Prevention Day, 25 years later, I'm still here and thankful for every day I get. Trust me, it gets better. #gratitude. We were going to talk hockey today. We don't have to talk hockey today. This has been fantastic. and just the ability to be able to let you tell everybody your story because not everybody's heard it. And there's hope and there are people you can reach out to. I think that's the message we've tried to do here today.
And thank you for I could talk for hours about this stuff, but yeah, you know what? That's my biggest thing. Go get the help you need. There's a better life out there. There truly is. And I'm proof of that. And there's other guys that are proof of that. Jamie Baker is another guy that's got a great story. So Robin Lehner. So it's, very thankful for you guys allowing me to tell my story. And hopefully, if there's one person out there that it helps, and it's all worth it.
That's the whole idea, Corey, that and you being well. So Thanks for coming on with us today, pal.
Hey, and when we have you on
Anytime,
next,
guys.
When we have you on next, we'll talk about the fact that this Vancouver Canuck team you're watching, there's some really great young talent on that team that is going to be a team to be reckoned with in the future here. So we'll get into that later in the season. Is that okay?
Absolutely. You guys can call me anytime. You know that.
Okay.
Thanks, Corey.
Thanks, Corey.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Pro-Am Sports is Edmonton's home for sports and entertainment memorabilia, featuring unique collectibles and apparel. We've got you and your fan cave covered. Pro-Am Sports, located in Edmonton at 12728 St. Albert Trail and proamsports.ca.
Joining us is former NHL netminder and also former coach in the National Hockey League with the Edmonton Oilers, Ron Lowe. Low Tide, the original Low Tide. How you doing today?
Really good. How are things going there, boys?
Great, thank you.
We're good.
It was a tough weekend for all of us, though, as we found out about the passing of a very good friend of ours, Ted Green. And I don't even know where to start with Teddy, but I guess let me start with this. Everywhere I looked in every story I looked at over the weekend, it used his nickname Terrible Teddy Green, and I laugh because he might have been that on the ice, and you might have seen that maybe in the locker room. I might have on occasion, but for the most part, he was not Terrible Ted Green.
No, actually, well, I think he was, if you're competing against him for space in front of the net. There could have been some merit to that. As a person, the way I knew Teddy off the ice was one of the absolute gentlemen I've met in the game, and probably one of the nicest people I've ever met. When I talk about him, I talk about Dave Semenko in almost the same voice. They both had that wit that was unbelievable. And Teddy was maybe the most caring person I've ever met in my life in the game.
Yeah, I agree, Ron. You know, you talk about Sammy and Ted being somewhat alike in that sense, and it's interesting. I was never in that inner circle as a coach or a teammate with Ted Green. I was one of those interlopers as a reporter who came in, and I tell you what, just like with Sammy, Teddy could be intimidating if you didn't know him. He'd give you that narrow-eyed stare, and it looked like one of those lizards about to eat a bug or something. And I remember he called me over once, and he didn't like something I'd written, and he didn't swear, he didn't yell, he didn't threaten, but he put one of those big meat hooks of his on my shoulder. And he said, Robin, I don't think what you wrote the other day was right. And we had a discussion. At the end of it, he just smiled, and all he said was, just be fair. He was so understated, so soft-spoken, and there was such a big heart under that exterior, you sometimes couldn't get to it unless you knew him.
No, and that is the truth. I mean, when he talked in a dressing room, and Teddy didn't really do a whole lot. He didn't do a bunch of yelling, I'll tell you that. In fact, I don't know if I've ever heard him raise his voice in the dressing room, but all he had to do was look at you. And if he was talking in a pregame speech or after a period, he would be giving his little chat before you go back out on the ice. And if he was looking at you, you knew where the comments were being directed. And believe me, like you said, if you wanted to stare down, it's one you wouldn't win if you were watching Teddy.
Do you have a favorite story? Is there one that sticks out in your mind? Because there's so many.
Well, I think one of the all-time great stories about Teddy, and it happened in Washington, D.C. one night. We were playing the Caps, and Teddy was head coach, and we were having a bit of a bitch of a time at that time. And I remember Shaun Van Allen got just smoked. I think it was by Craig Ludwig. Just drilled him, knocked him out cold. I mean, and we're talking out cold. And well, he kind of stumbles off on his own 2 feet, so we know he's not deathly, but we know he's hurt. So the doc comes in and says, "Geez, Teddy," he says, "we got kind of bad news here." He says the kid's totally out of it, can't remember the hit, and doesn't know who he is or where he's at. And Teddy says, "Well, when he wakes up, can you tell him he's Wayne Gretzky and we're in Washington and we need him?"
Yeah, that's classic Teddy. Yeah,
and in the meantime, he's still feeling really bad for Shaun, because the minute Shaun comes back in the room, I mean, he's really worried about him. But his wit at that point in time just caught me totally off guard, and the doc didn't know what to say. It was crazy, but that's Teddy.
Well, you know, and you saw that more than a lot of people, Ronnie. I know you were around Teddy a long time. It's interesting though. There's the book, you can't judge a book by its cover thing with Teddy. One of them is this: he had such a big heart. He was so generous, and he was generous in a way where it wasn't about him, it was about what he could do. And one of the things, and it's a common thread with you and I now, the first time I ever heard about the mustard seed in Edmonton, which deals with people struggling with poverty and homelessness. The first time I ever heard about the organization was because Teddy was going there, and he wanted to work in the back, he'd work in the kitchen, washing dishes, he'd serve food. There were no press releases, there was no look at me. And it's interesting, one story I got after talking to you the other day with one of the directors, Chris Knutson, who you knew, and was there when Teddy was there. He talks about it, the homeless fellow in the line, and he's eyeballing Teddy, and he looks him up and down, and he gets up to Teddy, and he says, "You're Ted Green. You're the Oilers coach." And he says, No. My name is Theodore." And that was Teddy. He was there so often, they told me, they actually, as a volunteer, they actually gave him his own business cards.
Well, in the end, I think that's one of the all-time great stories, and a lot of people didn't know that Ted did that work at the Mustard Seed, because certainly Ted didn't tell anybody. But it goes back to the same thing that Ted said a lot of times. It's amazing what can be accomplished when nobody has to get credit for what is being accomplished. And that was kind of Teddy in a nutshell. I mean, he was so into the community, but on an outside level, not where he had to be recognized or anybody had to say, well, geez, Ted Green's working at the Mustard Seed. He did it because he absolutely wanted to, and it was without fanfare.
Really, when I think about working with you guys inside and behind the doors, there was Ted and there was Bob McCammon, guys with just crazy senses of humor that a lot of times people would just not recognize that it was even there. You must have loved the fact that these guys had a bit of a gruff and tough exterior, but the moment you got into the locker room or got into the coach's room and you're working out on the bike, man, those lines would fly, huh?
Well, yeah, Green and I used to watch a lot of video together. He'd be on the treadmill and I'd be on the bike, and the one-liners that came out of there were unbelievable. And it was really funny in New York because there were so many mistakes on the ice, and Greeny used to sit there and he looked at me one day and he said, "Can you imagine these old guys and how much money they're getting paid, and the mistakes they make are exactly like the guys in Edmonton when they were young and didn't get paid anything?" I almost fell off my bike that day, but that's Greeny. I mean, he recognized it. One of the things about Teddy that a lot of people didn't understand is his analytics of the game. He knew the game inside out. It was amazing. Him and Muck would sit down and they would go over films, and probably one of the reasons that they won 5 cups in Edmonton is that two of them disagreed on a lot of things. And Teddy always told me, and that's one of the things he did tell me, if you're going to be a head coach, you better stand by your conviction unless it's wrong. And that's probably one of the things I took away from Ted, is that you have to fight for what you think is right. And if you realize it's wrong, you just back away subtly and carry on. And yeah, that's the kind of guy he was.
I always remember too, after we had the Todd Bertuzzi and the Steve Moore incident, where the media was clamoring for some comments. The national media in particular were at the practice that day, wanted some comments from Teddy because of the Wayne Mackey incident. And he was leery to do it initially until I convinced him we'll do it all at once with everybody. And then he realized maybe I can do some good here. And the moment he recognized that, it was really easy to get him out. And that's just the kind of guy he was.
Yeah. I mean, very, like I said, not one bit self-centered, always looking for basically the betterment of the game. And if you could have had him at coaches' symposiums, which he didn't go to, if you could have ever got him there, you would have found a wisdom that was probably beyond a lot of people's comprehension, because he understood the game that well. And it's because he studied it. I mean, let's face it, man. He had to redo his whole body after the Wayne Mackey thing, and he went on and played. Taught himself to write left-handed. Like, are you kidding me? The guy's life is a book of perseverance, and to be honest, check the number of rings on his fingers. I mean, The guy was amazing.
Five rings with the Oilers, coaching, a couple with the Boston Bruins, and you and Teddy's time in Edmonton as coaches, it sort of came after the the parade on Jasper Avenue era. You had you had a tough job at times there when you came on board and when Teddy was there, and he would have had to use every ounce of what he'd learned and relearned about the game, because it was not an easy gig, was it?
No, it definitely wasn't, and I think a lot was expected of our team, and if you looked at it, probably what was expected wasn't going to be achieved. And in the back end of that, probably that hurt more than anything. But the one thing that didn't change was the commitment to work. And Teddy, and he came to the rink every morning. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was days when he had headaches, terrible migraines, and you'd be there studying film, and you'd sit there and go, how in the hell are you doing this? But that's Teddy. I mean, he was just that fierce competitor. I mean, I remember one night between Boston and Hartford, we had to actually stop the bus, and he got out to get air because he had a migraine that was so bad. And yet the next night he's on the bench and doing his job. That's exactly the way he was.
I can't recall if it was the playoff run of 1990 where they went on to win the Cup, but I remember vividly, and this told me about the respect level the players had for him. We had a little incident where he got into it with some fans in Winnipeg before getting on the bus, and most of the players were on the bus, and I remember the players saying, Greeny's in trouble, and Bucky, of course, Kelly Buchberger was the first one off the bus, but that bus just unloaded because they wanted to go out there and back up their buddy, and I still remember that to this day, Ron.
Yeah, it was... Yeah, my dogs are going nuts here right
That's
now.
okay. That's what they do.
Yeah. Anyway, there was an incident there. It was kind of a crazy one. I remember somebody said something about one of Ted's sons, and that's something you didn't get away with.
No.
Teddy took offense, and our bus cleared out.
Oh, yeah. No, I was sitting there, and as I said, I remember Kelly flying off that bus, and everybody was off that bus. And I thought, are they going to save him? No, they were just going to back him up. They weren't. No, Ted Green never needed to be saved.
No, that's what Bucky said.
Save the other guy.
By the time I got out there, he said Teddy had the guy under the car. So, I mean, no, that's exactly, and those are the things that you remember about Teddy. I mean, what a family guy he was. Holy man, he was so proud of his kids and his wife, and amazing. I remember one story that Butch Goring told me. Butchie and Teddy played at the same golf course in St. Boniface. And at this golf course, they had a thing on Saturday and Sunday mornings where people teed off on 1 and people teed off on 10. So they got more players through. And then people that came off of 18 would filter into 1 and play between tee-off times on 1 that were already slotted. So Teddy's there with his 2 boys one day, and he's come off of 18, and he's going to number 1 to tee off because they had started on 10. So this guy comes running up to the tee box and said, "This is my tee box. It's my turn to tee off." And Teddy goes, "No, it isn't. We just came off of 18. and we're going off of one, and you guys are teeing off after us. And the guy just gets steaming, irate and mad, and he runs down to his freaking club, picks up an iron, and comes up with it half held in his hand, and he's coming up to Ted with the iron, and looks like they're going to go into a swinging duel. And Teddy looks at the guy and pulls out his driver and says, "Sir, you've underclubbed yourself." And Butch Goring happened to be there that day and said it was the funniest thing. He said the guy just melted and walked back down to his golf cart. So, Teddy, the memories.
Hey, Ronnie, if the dogs are barking, I know we got to let you go, but, there's going to be a little something I know before the Philly game at Rogers Place Wednesday. I imagine there's a lot of thoughts and good memories with the alumni there with Teddy. Edmonton was a better city with Ted Green in it, and I know a lot of people are going to miss him, huh?
Well, absolutely. And, that Teddy and the family are probably the most private people in the world. And they are very much into their grieving process right now. And I feel for them. It's amazingly hard, and we've lost a great guy, and my hearts go out to them.
All I know is when I heard and I saw the announcement at MSG, and my first reaction was I welled up a little bit, and then I started to smile, and then I started to laugh because of all the stories, and I thought, you know what? He'd be so happy to hear that.
Yeah, well, he is, like I said, Robin, you're right. We're going to miss him in the city. And anybody that has ever met him is going to miss him, because that's what he left. He left that impression on you every time.
Yeah.
Ron, thanks for your time today. We appreciate it. Those dogs need to be fed.
Yeah. Okay. We'll talk to you.
And we'll see you somewhere.
Thanks,
Thanks, Ron.
Thanks, Ronnie.
Okay.
Fresh air and fun. Experience it all this summer in a new RV from Carefree RV. Trade up to the perfect bunk model from reputable brands like Winnebago at Forest River. So many floor plans and payments starting at just $53 bi-weekly. Plus, 1 free year of CoachNet warranty on all RVs. Carefree RV opens 7 days a week in Edmonton and Leduc. Online, carefreerv.ca. Carefree.
Wow, that was quite the show today. It got a little heavy at times with Corey, but it had to, because that's a story that's simply got to be told, Robin.
Yeah, and it's important in so many ways outside the world of sports. Corey Hirsch takes a lot of courage to talk about what he's been through, and the upside of that is what he is now doing, advocating for people struggling with mental health issues. It's a wonderful story. If you haven't read it, it's called Dark. It's the Players Tribune. You can find it, give it a read, and there's a follow-up story by Corey called You Are Not Alone. If you're one of those people struggling with mental health issues, or even if you're not, and you want to try and understand what the person next to you might be suffering silently, I'd give them a read.
Funny how Robin Williams' passing really seemed to enlighten a lot of people, because there was a guy who was so full of energy and so full of life, and yet people did not know what was going on behind the scenes. And it just seems like that woke a lot of people up. And you know what? So I'm with you. By the way, if you want to check out Corey on Twitter, it's at Corey Hirsch. It's as simple as that. The other thing we got to pass along, a big thank you to Ron Lowe for joining us today to talk about his friend Ted Green. And that was, like I said, it's been an interesting show because it's been heavy at times, but we've also had some laughs. And that's what we try to do here. And I don't know what else I can tell you. Look who we have on the show next week, by the way. Stu Grimson, the Grim Reaper, has got a book out.
Reaper.
Looking forward to talking to him. You could email us your thoughts on this show or maybe some shows in the future that you'd like us to track somebody down. We'll try to do that. Email us at mightymouth@shaw.ca. Your Twitter account is?
Robin_Brownlee. Simple as that.
And mine is at Bryn Mightymouth. And it's pretty straightforward. Hey, before we go, what do you want to say?
Well, I got to tell you, Bryn, I think we knocked it out of the park today, to be honest. Both segments I thought were really good. I hope people out there enjoy it as much as I did doing it. And one thing before we go, Godspeed, Ted Green.
Proceeding was recorded earlier because we were ashamed to do it now.